Okay, ready or not, it's time for poetry. Yay! Welcome, everyone. I'm Zoe Dickinson. I'm going to be your host for this evening at Planet Earth Poetry. Tonight, we have Isabella Wang and Sandy O'Reilly reading for us. And I'm really excited to hear both of them read. And we're reversing our order for the evening. So we're going to start with our featured readers and then have a little break and then do the open mic. I just, before I get too far, want to acknowledge that we are gathered on the Lekwungen speaking territory in the lands of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. And we're very grateful to be here tonight. Isabella has Pebble Swing over there. I always forget to ask the price of the book. How much are you selling your book for? 18. All right, we can make change for you if you need. So 18 bucks for that beautiful book over there, and you can check it out at the break or after the show. I also want to mention a big thank you to our sponsors, the Writers Union of Canada, the League of Canadian Poets, the BC Arts Council, the Capital Regional District, the City of Victoria. Did I say that already? No, I didn't. And the Canada Council for the Arts. And of course, our individual contributors, both to our GoFundMe, this is Canada Helps now. We're a charity now. It's super great. Yeah. Our Canada Helps page and our sponsor Poet program. Thank you so much. And for that $5 that you throw into the basket at the break, that all of it makes such a huge difference and keeps us doing what we do. So thank you very much. For anyone who isn't already aware, we have washrooms in the far back corner of the bottom floor. So back there, but one floor down. And when the escalator is off, I just ask that you use the elevator because escalators are not up to code once they're not moving anymore. And the elevator is way over there. So if you need to pee, you get to do a whole tour of the store. You're welcome. Okay. I think that's everything that I needed to say, and I see that a few people at least got my memo. Yeah, just pull it open. There you go. That we are starting our live stream at 7:30. Excellent work, reading comprehension, A+ to our Zoom folks. Nobody reads, they say as a bookseller. All right, so I think we are ready. Yes. I'm just going to make sure that I am spotlighted here so that it records, right? All right, so I'm just going to introduce our poetic opener, Sandy O'Reilly. It's so weird to be doing this in the opposite order. I like it. I think it's like shaking me up, my little routine. Playing musical chairs here. Sandy O'Reilly is probably a familiar face to many who come here a lot. Is a wonderful regular reader at Planet Earth Poetry, has been involved in the PEP community for the past few years as a member of the Bees, which is our unofficial governing body, so to speak, of volunteers, powerhouse of volunteers that we have. That's really the lifeblood of PEP. And she recites her poetry as often as possible on Friday evenings. She has been published in the pandemic anthology, The Sky is Falling, which I think we actually have a few copies still here, so you can buy that at the break too, in fact, from Russell's. Welcome, Sandy.
Hi, everybody. I'm not entirely sure if these are poems. They're more prose-like than what I usually write for poems, but they might be someday. They're kind of musings. My best friend, my ex-husband, died about 18 months ago. He was really my person, the person who I could tell everything to, who I could say anything to, and he would say, "Oh, don't say that out loud to anybody," or I could say, tell him if he was being a jerk, etc. And I really miss him. And I only wrote one poem specifically about him, and I wrote it about a week after he died. But ever since then, he keeps showing up in my poems. So these are just some of the poems that he showed up with in the last year or so. The first one I call Floating. I'm not a floater. You might think because of my size that it'd be easy for me to just lay back on the water and then drift around like a maple leaf or a water strider. But I don't. I just sink. Mike was a floater. He was about 70 pounds heavier than me and a short guy, but he would just lay back in the water, put his head back and throw out his arms and drift around. I know it's about physics. It's about buoyancy and density, but I'm pretty sure that part of the reason I couldn't float was because I was a bit afraid. I have a couple of I almost drowned stories in my background, and I was always fighting it. I was never just comfortable enough or at ease enough just to go with the flow. I envied Mike, his ability to float. And he was like that in life too. I don't mean he drifted around aimlessly or irresponsibly. It wasn't like that, but he was a lot easier with things that showed up in life. He was motivated by challenge and by change, and all those things scared the crap out of me. And early on, I found it very difficult to deal with doing something new all the time. But I eventually trusted him, and I learned to trust myself and to have more confidence in my own abilities. Maybe some of his floatability rubbed off on me, maybe, but still, I haven't thrown myself on the mercy of any body of waters recently. This one's called, Mike and I were together for about, well, we knew each other for over 40 years and we were married for 28 of them. And one of the things that we did together really well, we had lots of fun and did lots of things, was we raised kids. We were good parents together. I call this one parenting in the dark. Most of us spend our time with one foot in the dark. We're kind of flirting with the edges. Sometimes we're seduced by its warm comfort or snagged on its hard edges or even shoved from behind by life. But we don't even know it until the light shows up and then makes us aware. When I was pregnant with our first child, our son, after the original wonder of that little butterfly flip in my belly and the terror of all those awful things that I thought could go wrong, I just decided things would be okay. I was the oldest of 5 after all, and I knew pretty much everything I needed to know about babies. So I figured everything would be fine. Wrong. I didn't know I was going to have heartburn for 9 months, or that I would never again be able to drink whole milk or eat tuna packed in oil. I didn't know I was going to have a really long labor and end up with a cesarean, and that the doctor would nick my bladder and I would have a catheter for 5 days. But the one thing that neither Mike nor I were prepared for was when that little boy showed up in our lives. He reached up with his tiny baby fists and thrust them right into our heart and hung on. It blew us away. Well, most of us figure it out. Parenting is a bit like night flying with no infrared goggles and no user manual. You're kind of thrashing around and you never know if you're doing the right thing or if you do the wrong thing, if you can fix it. But most of us have good intentions and we end up being decent parents and we figure it out. So by the time I was pregnant with our daughter 3.5 years later, we figured we knew what to do. Wrong again. We didn't know she was going to be 2.5 months early. She would have 4 complete blood exchanges in the first week, or surgery twice in the first 5 months, or be hospitalized for pneumonia 3 times the first year. We couldn't get any answers about anything out of the doctors. All they would ever say was, we don't know. We have no idea. You're just going to have to wait and see. So we did. We waited and saw, and it turned out okay. We were blessed with everything being okay in the end. Parenting is sometimes just like standing on the edge of a cliff on a moonless night with 1 foot raised, a 90-mile-an-hour wind at your back, and no parachute. You don't know if that first step is going to be 6 inches down and you're going to be running forward to all the bright lights, or if it's going to be a mile down and there's going to be all kinds of wreckage and sorrow at the bottom. You just never know. But it isn't all dark. There's lots of bright lights in parenting, and Mike brought those lights to our parenting lots of times, and sometimes I did. And it was a lot of fun and adventure and love too. And we loved doing it. We both agreed that it was the best thing we ever had an opportunity to participate in. And now I'm almost 74 and I realize I actually don't know very much of anything. I only know a couple of things. I know that I can still feel those little tiny baby hearts or baby fists in my heart, and it still blows me away. And I know that I wasn't ready for Mike to die, and I'm still not 1.5 years later. Some days I just spend keeping his light bright in my heart, and some days it's lonely in the dark. One of the things that I really loved about Mike was that he could make me laugh, and he had a wicked sense of humor that he passed on to my kids. They used to run circles around me. It wasn't that I didn't get what they were saying, it was just that I was always 2 steps behind them. This next one has a little bit of humor in it. I call it On the Bus. I took you on the bus today, Mike. Kind of ironic since you never went on the bus here or in all the years we lived in Shanghai. But I took you at your ashes actually in my backpack to the funeral home to Bill because he was going to pack some up to send back to New Brunswick to be buried in your family plot. I suspect that you sent them by plane, although it would have been too much if they'd have sent them by bus. Can you imagine traveling all across the country, stopping in all those hokey little towns, eating in really bad restaurants, stopping at bowling alleys to get a chocolate bar or a bag of chips, or behind the bar with the bus driver running around yelling, "Don't go in the bar, don't go in the bar." All that time spent with people that you don't know, all those sounds and smells going on and on for hours and even days, you would have hated it. Strangers and crowds were never your thing. You were happiest surrounded by family and a few close friends. Where am I now? Okay, I'll take you with me when I travel. I'm going to get one of those little tiny urns and put some of your ashes in it and tie it on a string and hang it around my neck. I know you like beaches. You grew up with a cottage on the Bay de Chaleur. You told great stories about the year that you and Claude and Jim camped on the beach of the Baja. I'll take you to Belize, where there are good beaches and bars, and to Portugal, and you can see what beaches are like on the other side of the Atlantic. And I remember you always liked warm winds. I'll take you to Morocco, to Fez and the tanning vats, and then out into the desert. You can feel that warm wind. I'll take you to Iceland, which you would never go to on your own, just to show you some of the things that I think are great about this universe. Hell, I'll take you when I travel around Victoria. I'll take you on the number 11 bus all the way down the beautiful gorge, or on the 26 into Esquimalt and get off and have a coffee at Guido's, or on the 31 down to Ogden Point, where you and Paul like to go and feed the birds, or number 8 all the way out to the end at the Oak Bay Marina, where I once spent an afternoon watching a young man play the piano on the edge of the water. I can do that now, and it's a good way to keep you close to my heart.
Thank you, Sandy. I love that. What a great way for him to stay in your life, just dropping into your poems periodically. Okay, so next we have our featured reader of the evening, and we're so happy to have Isabella with us tonight. I've been really excited for this one. Isabella Wang is the author of the chapbook On Forgetting the Language. Her full-length debut, Pebble Swing, is currently shortlisted for the Dorothy Livesay Poetry Prize. She has been shortlisted for ARC's Poem of the Year contest, the Malahat Review's Far Horizons contest, and Long Poem contest, and was the youngest writer to be shortlisted twice for the New Quarterly's Edna Staebler essay contest. She is completing a double major in English and World Lit at SFU. She is also a youth mentor with Vancouver Poetry House and editor at Room Magazine. And as you know, I like to dig a little online about our featured readers, so I found this interview with Jennifer Mann for the Victoria Festival of Authors. I found a little tidbit. Isabella said, "Writing has gotten slower these days, but I think that is a good thing. I'm learning that it's important to take care of myself as much as the work. If a line of poetry or an idea comes, it spends more time in my head. Most of the time now, a poem begins once one line or a few lines are formed, and that's when I initiate a relationship to the work on paper." I love that idea of initiating a relationship to the work on paper. So thank you so much for being here, Isabella. Come on up. See if I can guess your height. You can put your slide in. Go.
Oh, hi, everyone. Oh, hi, Lisa.
Okay, is that okay for you?
Yes, this is good.
You can pull it up and down.
Yeah. Hi, is this a good volume for everyone? Also, this bookstore is huge. Everyone keeps telling me that I need to come to this bookstore in Victoria, and now I know why. And for that reason, but not that reason alone, it's such a pleasure and gift to be invited here. I don't get to read in Victoria very often, but every time it's one of the most enjoyable experiences that I'm left with, and so I'm very grateful to that. And thank you, Zoe and Leanne, for so generously and graciously hosting me, and for everyone for being here. And Sandy, yeah, thank you for that beautiful introduction and poems or musings that you read, because I don't know, it makes me so emotional now whenever we talk about missing someone, because I think that kind of grief you get from missing someone, I've come to know it akin to breathing. It's become spiritual for me, and that comes back in some of the poems I'm going to read too. And I think one thing I've been thinking about when it comes to missing the people we do is that sometimes the point of healing isn't about overcoming or finding closure in the grief of things, the peoples we lost, but it's about learning to live with that grief, the losses of something that mattered to us. And for that reason, we want to, and rightfully want to, hold close. And that's okay too. I'm going to start with a few poems in Pebble Swing, and then I'll move on to some newer work. I always like to start with this one. Elegy for Winter. Thawing, I want to be the announcer of good news. I want to be the boughs of maple trees. The arms of children that like trees elevate their limbs upon first sight of snow. I want to be the invitation that conducts inches of the sky's infinitesimal flowers to us each year, or assume the receiving end as the ground, grooming its birthmarks with the ritual frost of winter's exhale. I want to be an infinite pattern of snow crystals, greeting a child's morning wishes, to be the granter of wishes in as many diverse branches as snow. There's an inspiring beauty to snow I'm beginning to see again. Something about earlier drafts of a poem I wrote in winter that I felt the need to transform afterward, unlearn the unlearning, unbreak what had been broken. I know there's a lot of hurting in the world right now. I know it's difficult to hear another poem about grieving. So I want to be a lot of things good. And maybe the snow does too. Maybe that's why it clings on to our mittens. Maybe it wants to feel the warm comfort of wool. Be that comfort to strangers. The twine that knits itself around the negative spaces of longing and marrow, where fingers and bones are still rummaging for explanations. I had a dream where it snowed for 3 days, and the snow melted. When I woke up, I knew it might not snow again this year. It might be fruitless hanging on to old poems, trying to revive my memories of a lost winter, as if plucking out the tulip bulbs I immersed in the garden last fall would somehow make the frozen soil in my palms bloom again. A poem where the only feeling it exuded onto the reader the first time was brokenness. What if I were to say to the world, look, you're changing so fast. You're so broken, I can't follow you. Is your snow a metaphor for the thawing that began before you were ready to know? I remember, after Joe Brainard. I remember it takes more than one person to remember. That's why the word is numbered in it, a vestigial of thought, or a collective. I remember a time and a land in the process of forgetting. That wasn't any time or land or resided in my lifetime, but I remember because the woman in my family said stories. I remember stories as a kind of land you arrived at, and I remember poetry as both an immigration policy and the destination that was a city, wrote me. I remember continents as rock formations with history, and some histories too loud for youngers to hear, and that's why my parents said we were leaving. I remember leaving hours behind, but not the leaving. The poetry of Levi clearer than any language that has been bestowed upon me. I remember being told that it took 6 months for a letter he wrote to arrive by sea, and the thick scrolls of watercolor paintings with red emblems in a cursive I could not read. And I remember fishermen who risked their lives for a couple of stamped copper coins to deliver the words of the country's poets in ink. I remember reading the Pinyin of Jin in grade 1, Levi's poem about how a person glimpsing the rays of moonlight missed his ancestral homeland. I folded down the year of the accompanying image from the book, blue on top of water, like a salty river that wept the color of sadness. I remember land as a river you can excavate. I remember the children and their villages and jujube trees, and schools with plastic bags for windows and laps for desks, and jasmine-flavored incense lit with the corner of their little red books of mouse writing. I remember construction workers pouring cement down our extinguished fictions, land reclaimed and the future of the country's children revised under a new ideology. I remember my father's childhood ingrained in a patch of jujube trees by the front entrance of his village's elementary school that his mother helped to establish, planted the trees with her students. I remember the dirt-lined rims of his tiny thumbs grasping the edges of Mao's little red book, the structure of the day's lecture, counting more fingers and toes you've lost than you have left from the frostbite on the 4-mile walk to school. I remember road as metaphor for river and its significance to me, the curvature of the schoolyard, behind which was a wood with jujube trees and a stream. I remember my father as the no-mom kid the village knew, wanting to be with him on the trees planted by his mother, his 7th year, where he'd imagine himself being hugged and carried by her. When nobody was looking into the trees, he would shout, "But what were you like, mother?" I remember the land on which my grandmother was seized by the Chinese communist leader. I remember her life reclaimed like water that fed the village children, buried and lost forever. I remember land as the body and hug and whisper and mother of a father and grandmother I never knew. Therefore, I remember land as a body of poems I carved into the ground with a stick and turned to mud with the tears of my father. I remember my father who never intended to tell me any of this. I remember him asking about this grandmother I never knew. He said, "Your 奶奶跟爷爷住在山里面，好久没见你了." And I said, "No, tell me about your other mother, your mother." I remember his reaction. "How do you know about her?" I remember the landing and the years, the growing up and the rain that wore Vancouver as cologne. I remember 2 years after becoming a writer, the latest poem, a collection of letters to my grandmother I never knew. I remember a poem entitled Dear Nan, the part of the poem where I asked her, "May I call you that?" and thinking it a historical tragedy that the words for the names of family members are given, but no one had given me her name. I remember Tiananmen Square, the panorama overlooking tower gates, Chanan Avenue, a stretch of road en route to school, intersecting 2 districts. This square I remember clearer than the contours of my grandmother's face. But I remember the heart of the archive like a 90s reel-to-reel tape my country could never erase because the women in my families still had their stories. I remember opening and shutting the windows of our rented bedroom in a house on 41st Street, 1 minute, you were a part of the streets below. The next, all was silent. I remember many afternoons collecting fallen chestnuts and the crinkling layers of mush, rotten leafy mush, swimming in it as if I was in water. I remember going to see the salmon run in the Okanagan, learning of the grueling journey that the parents had to endure before spawning and dying. I remember looking at the distance we've crossed and the distance a poem has to make it in translation. I remember the going back and the returning and the going back that never happened, and the story of one of Levi's poems on the other side of translation, that once there forgot its roots and mother tongue and the fact that it had prior origins at all, and days when the task of translation becomes too great. I remember forgetting the fact that the members of my family have forgotten me. Oh, and the bug finally left. I think I'm going to call him Timothy. I went to the park today, and there was a peacock, and I actually named that one Refrigerator. Springtime puzzles. 1. The color of plum blossoms taints my dreams. Light turns the wallpaper. Time falls in gradients down the hourglass. Click, clock, click, clock. The mechanic heartbeat of a petal falling. In my dreams, the deceased shadow of a country laid to rest. I, Isabella, was born to a cradle full of tempest rains, the white flower in blooms. 2. The rhododendron, an explosion of blooms where a dog peed last winter, pink before, now blue. A parcel arrives wrapped in blue flax paper with the word coda. The silhouette of the bird shudders and falls from behind closed shutters. Souvenir from my mother's trip to Africa, 7 ivory elephant figurines. Tell me, does it hurt the ground more or the tree if you're too extracted by its roots? 3. Again today, someone has asked me where I'm from. I am of this earth, my mother's womb, I say. Plum blossoms don't fall on a late Sunday morning. It's spring clearing. Each day I aspire to be more like water, the kind that can be reached into and still flow. I leave an armchair out in the back alleyway. Then I leave myself out. We wait for dusks to fall, like driftwood waiting to be softened by the rain. 4. Thin scrows of rice paper placed before me, a topography of Asia. I practice blotching my first ink characters in Chinese, turning ripples into tears. A map disintegrates with the stroke of a fine horsehair brush. A holy place, the tombed basilica of Shoshan, where I looked with my father for the last time. Beyond the one-way curvature of the railway track, I am chugging out of China. Only a plum blossom emerges. The reified outlines of the country I once called home. 5. Dwindling candle, taking flame. The plum blossoms are burning. Light remains in the closed shutters of my eyelids. Autumn sunshine pulls through the rim of a glass mug. A robin appears from the last sketch of a retracting spring. Here it's morning, not where she is. My grandmother is dying, and I am in full blooms. And that's all the poems I'm going to read from Pebble Swing. I'm going to move on to this new collection I'm working on that really in itself is a series of long poems that compose a lyric of grief. It's what's been, I think it's an intersection, also a map of different forms of passing and missing and grief that in a sense has affected all of us during the pandemic. And also, I hate reading off of phones. I always feel like it's so rude. But the printer at home is on a union strike. It's not working. To other cancer patients finding out their diagnoses near the holidays. It's a beautiful world, and I'm scared to leave it. It's a beautiful world transformed in night and 5 inches of snow, and I'm halted by it. Everywhere are the feelings I wrote of the Marina timbered mornings of the city, written years ago, never so still, but this time feeling again, but cannot express, or hear, nor cry. I walk down the water written before, muscle memory asking what to say of the fishing boats now, like winter loons anchoring stoically, their mast fins to the sky. What to say of anything now? I know it's not all beautiful, like the new symptoms hurt, and there are people you love you haven't told until the holidays are over. City windows smashed because the people without a home are cold. Only the ERs are open, and only you and one incarcerated patient got private rooms. This is the white Christmas you'll never forget, and there's not an inch of blue in the sky. Dawning, yawning quietly until you open the door, and it's beautiful again. Timothy is gone. And these are just 3 poems I'm going to read from the second sequence. The collection is structured in a series of passages, and I'm going to end with the first passage actually. But this November, it was, I think, a time that affected a lot of us in the poetry community because we lost Phyllis Webb and Lee Miracle on the same day. And, you know, sometimes it's always disheartening at times when, you know, people who pass, who you care about, knowing they've passed and the world seems to go on. But in a sense, in this small community, tight-knit community that I've come to, you know, that I know also knows, you know, these people very closely, something hasn't kept going and something has been changed. And so over the month, right after it happened, I was writing a poem, almost a poem a day, in the form of letters to friends who kind of shared my grief and kind of to comfort them. So there's 3 of these I'm going to read. Where have the poets gone? The wise, the sager than us, elders who rocked generations of poets into their worlds, but always insisted that they do the following. Because we are ready, they say. This world, they taught us that leading is remembering the ones who ask, are they still thinking about us? Did we at once gather them and hold them warm this November month? Tell them that nights echo thoughts of how much they're with us? Did we gather enough poems that tell them we still kind of need them? In this world, did we gather a light for them daily? Days when we are cold and not ready to see the places they found and are traveling to be present for. Where are the better years? Where are the summers and more comfortable rains forgetting another day? Where are the coffee tables and phone call guests at the enjambments of people's care? Stairs we say we miss. Some people, the further they are, the longer we long to reach them. Maybe it's a line break, a breath. This lifetime, the rains blending with the mise-en-scène on the ferry ride over. Where are the forgotten letters? Times she called and you didn't hear your ringer. Now raining her way back. They know we need them. The handful who's been leaving us messages all our lives, knowing we'd only find them after. The rains traveling with Phyllis a day later, departing, knowing you'd be okay. Willing heart, beat slower these roving winter mornings. It's okay to say you feel a poem that is different. The winds today express the unfinished tempo of the song you can't get yourself to write just yet. See, you've got watchful ones holding you too. You've got the trees you watered at the roots, staying steady and tall. And I'll just end with this last sequence. And it's written in conversation with Phyllis Black's poems, and also a poet called Aiqing, who was very much like my grandmother, a writer and a poet who was persecuted for her work during the Chinese Cultural Revolution. So there's two different conversational threads, I think. And also a third one being the poet that I was writing and exchanging poetry with during this time. And so a lot of our lines kind of mix and respond to each other. It begins with an epigraph by Aiqing. Quote, "Our great land that was dead, now under the bright sky, is born again," unquote. And it's from Aiqing's poem, Reborn Land. 星座, constellations, are ageless suns reborn as stars in the seats of a conversation. They can neither ferry nor pine for a different Steradian arrangement, but keep talking. Their expositions depend on the peoples of lands and revolutions seeing them, imagining the bright sky deep futures of their holding illuminations until they're gone. Mornings, how are their heavens? Is there urgency for us to join the departed still? The skylarks shepherd in nimbus dunes over sixth snow, and the blue that dawns before dark xylem leaves its edges with a late wood and memoir of some pianissimo's verse. Is there a thing as crying in havens? A rival forgiving the 10 earth hearts, their ghosting of the whistling stratosphere, forgiving them a night to remember the tender orbiting of another year's late growth, and picking up conifers of verse by the side of the body's capering road. Water misses 3 weeks, filling in 6 years of winter meaning's absence. It took time for 3 movements and old Chinese proverbs to gather connected threads among barrels of leaves, stipules and veins laddering tight mycelial growth, raking because river constellations rove over the sweater of the man wheeling his chair. Li Yuran and Aiqing met in the beyondery of verse, like France Island of paper clips, miniature warrants, dividing cylinder holes out of 2 pages in the precipitations of this life. They met before meeting again in heaven because of snug medicine. Friendship fielding the incarcerated under revolution's tuberculosis, and cornbread equals industrial train dust. Some can no longer divide themselves into halves to be the poet's split leaf propositions. So we bowl them with ghost arms into piles. For a while, chestnut leaves whole with others again. Propositions. I could erase your hand with a soft dinosaur eraser and tell you in return that the two halves of what you think are fires and floods are just feelings. The weather expressing its newfound poems collaged, resport of light that remains unmade, flows out of the poets who fainted on stage in New York, Buffalo. Climate scarves and piano keys drum against the pharynx of those with no language to lose. Form more intense friendships, love constellating. It makes sense that through extinction's pulse there are end species, atmospheric cyan, and rivers all want to live these slower climbing weeks of perhaps their last couple months. Only the color blue would not go extinct, because it was the last pigment we spent perfecting. And its seeable cellular duplications of grief has become Mia Ardern's novella. The last swordfish in water's nostalgia burns, evolving into a monster, but survives the rainbow stripes of gasoline riding the roof of her home, and catching little fires like three fishermen and their dog planked to the bottom of the boat. For 16 hours, as one steered the northwest axis of the rudder, and the others slept unsuspecting. Thank you, everyone.